And we're live. Welcome to a short episode of Engaging the Eagle, exploring US foreign policy in Southeast Asia. It's our first one in over a year, in fact. I'm Kevin.
Hi, this is Adrian.
And we'll be your hosts for this episode, titled The 2025 Government Shutdown. Now, government shutdowns aren't anything new to American politics, with the government shutting down about 20 times since 1975 over funding disagreements. The duration of these shutdowns, however, has generally been increasing, with the last shutdown in December 2018 lasting 34 days. Adding to the uncertainty, United States President Donald Trump has threatened a mass layoff of federal workers to pressure Democrats to back moves to end the shutdown. What are the implications of the ongoing government shutdown? How have the two parties tailored their political messaging to address the crisis? And how could this impact government functions such as the conduct of US foreign policy? So, Adrian, it's been 2 years since our last episode on the near shutdown of the government back in 2023. I'm feeling a lot of deja vu, except we're actually in a shutdown right now. For the benefit of our audience, let's start from the top. Why does the US government seem to find itself facing shutdowns so often? What's with their chronic inability to follow the budgeting process?
That's a great question, Kevin. And it really starts with America's rather long, complex, convoluted budgetary process. So something called the Congressional Budget and Empowerment Control Act of 1974 sets out America's modern budgetary process. For short, the Budget Control Act was enacted really to reinforce Congress's so-called power of the purse under Article 1 of the Constitution, especially in the face of President Nixon's continued empowerment of congressionally appropriated funding. So the problem lies in the fact that, while the Budget Act really lays out this supposedly rational and orderly, congressionally driven budgetary process, it is very long, as I said, right? Sort of convoluted. And because it is long and convoluted, it also has multiple sort of veto points where different interests can delay or create stalemates in the budgetary process. For our listeners, we can think of the budgetary process as having sort of two different sections, right? Sort of one is Congress creating a budget resolution, right? A budget resolution lays out the funding levels for the new fiscal year. It is also subject, right, to all sorts of political machinations, contestations, and delays.
Yeah, if I'm not mistaken, right now the financial year for the US government, it starts October 1st and ends September 30th, right?
Yes.
And prior to that, it started in July. It was only delayed in the 70s.
So the Budget Control Act lays out deadlines for this entire budgetary process, right? But Congress almost always never meets any of those deadlines, and there are no real penalties for Congress failing to meet those deadlines. So, as you mentioned earlier, the US federal fiscal year begins on October the 1st.
Yeah.
But this budget resolution process is only one half of the process. While there may be a budget resolution, funding comes separate from this budget resolution process. So the US does not have a single appropriation bill, right? Rather, what they have are 12 separate appropriations bills that is commensurate with the 12 appropriations subcommittees on Capitol Hill.
Yeah.
Right? So this year, before October the 1st, none of those 12 appropriations bills were passed. And what usually happens is Congress passes these so-called stopgap or temporary appropriations bills called continuing resolutions.
CRs, yeah.
CRs, right? To fund the federal government until those appropriations bills are passed, or what usually happens is Congress begins to panic and they jam all the appropriations bills together. And right, you have these sort of large monster so-called omnibus bills that Congress passes, right, sort of at the last minute with really very little oversight or knowledge about what are specifically in these omnibus bill, because there's this panic that overcomes Congress and the need to pass a budget for the year.
Yeah, that's definitely true. But what exactly happens then when the US government shuts down?
Okay, so to be technically correct, it is not a full government shutdown. It is a partial government shutdown.
Yeah.
Different departments and agencies will have contingency plans about the staff that are deemed essential and non-essential.
Yeah.
So what happens in this partial government shutdown is non-essential federal workers are furloughed. So they are basically put on unpaid leave, right? And the essential workers are still at their jobs, but they're not being paid. What usually happens in previous government shutdowns is after government reopens, Congress appropriates funds to back pay federal workers that have been furloughed or were working without pay during government shutdowns.
Yeah. Thanks, Adrian, for your response. There are quite a few threads I'd like to pick up on there, but I suppose I'd like to, dig a little bit deeper when it comes to what makes this ongoing shutdown special. How is it different from shutdowns that have happened in the past, the most recent one being in 2018?
So we can compare this current shutdown, right? Sort of not just to the previous shutdown in Trump 1.0 that you mentioned that happened in December 2018, but look at the larger shutdowns with President Obama and also President Clinton going back to 1995 and 1996. So if we look at these subset of shutdowns, the conventional wisdom is the party that initiates the shutdown usually tends to get blamed for the repercussions of a shutdown where people are inconvenienced because national parks are shut down, government services are either unavailable or delayed, right? But here is a bit different because one, the initiator of this current shutdown, the Democrats in the Senate, are now in the minority party. So if we look at the previous shutdowns, the party that did the shutdown at least controlled one branch of government, if not one chamber of one branch of government. In 2018, 2019, the Democrats controlled the House.
The House, yeah.
The Republicans controlled one chamber of Congress in the Obama administration, and the Republicans controlled both the House and the Senate under Clinton. So here, right, the Democrats are in the minority in the Senate, right? But because of the rules of the Senate, which require a filibuster-proof vote,
so
right?
60 then.
60 votes, right? Democrats can gum up the passage of a continuing resolution in the Senate. So that's one difference. Another difference is in the previous shutdowns, there was at least one party that was, if not opposed to the shutdown, wanted to reopen government. Right? But if we look at the current dynamics, both sides seem to be spoiling, right,
for a fight
over this shutdown.
Exactly. It's like a game of chicken right now.
So yes, right? So and I think both sides have some sort of calculation that this shutdown is to their advantage. If we look at the Democrats, I think their calculation is they have, at least the congressional Democrats have backed down from the Trump administration since January.
Yeah.
There are lots of reports that rank and file Democrats, and especially the progressive wing of the Democrats, were very unhappy with their congressional leadership for not really pushing back on Trump's One Big Beautiful bill.
Yeah.
And so now Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries are under pressure from rank and file Democrats to make a stand somewhere, right? And for them, that stand is going to be on the Obamacare subsidies plus trying to restore the cuts that were made to Medicaid. I think their calculation is, if you look at some of the polling, healthcare is one of the very few issues that Democrats have a perceived advantage over the Republicans.
I see. So what would the Republican consideration be then, when it comes to their wargaming out the shutdown?
Right. So if we look at the Republicans, I think their rationale can be broken down into two parts. One is this shutdown is taking place under conditions of a unified government, unified Republican government.
Yeah.
And so the Republican strategy is to blame Democrats for being obstructionists. Right? That they are thwarting the will of the American people, right? The American people voted in Republicans to control both the presidency and the Congress, right? You have a bunch of rogue Democrats, right? A minority in the Senate, gumming up works, refusing to vote for a clean CR to reopen government. That's, I think, one strategy. And the other calculus, I think, comes from the White House, right? And we see this in the threats from President Trump, right? Saying that he is considering not just furloughing federal workers, but making permanent cuts.
Yeah, laying them off.
Laying them off, right? Sort of the technical term is reduction in force, right? But it's a euphemism for laying off federal workers permanently. Whether that he goes through with that or he sees that as a point of negotiating leverage in these shutdown negotiations, we'll have to see.
Yeah, because it really seems like a situation where it's damned if you do, damned if you don't for the Democrats. If they draw a line in the sand, the layoffs might get worse and we might see, like Doge 2.0, especially with the new head of Doge and OMB, Russ Vought, in charge. But if they cave in, then, well, I think there goes their main chance to make a stand until probably the midterm election.
Exactly, right? And don't forget that this administration is also different from other administrations during shutdown. So we see on a lot of agency and department websites clear messages saying, right, this is a Democrat shutdown. If you're having problems, blame the Democrats. Again, right, sort of never mind that these sort of messages might actually be violations of the Hatch Act. It's in no way, right, sort of stopping or slowing down the administration.
Yeah, no kidding. I think one of the questions that no one has a good answer to right now is, when it comes to blame for this shutdown, is the blame falling more on the Republican Party or the Democrat Party? It's probably a bit too early to say.
So I think the blame game is a bit complex.
Yeah.
What we have seen over time with these shutdowns is, sort of American politics, American society has become even more polarized.
Oh, yeah.
Context matters, right? So I think what this means is, with the parties being polarized, with society being polarized, the small slice in the middle keeps getting smaller. Right? So, Democrats will obviously blame Republicans. Republicans will always, right, blame the Democrats. That is standard fare. But the slice in the middle that can be swayed in terms of who to apportion blame is getting ever smaller. And I think one problem the Democrats are facing is we are seeing this longer trend, right, since the last election, that Democratic Party identifiers are shrinking in the population. Right? We can talk about this at another time, but realignment, I think, is happening in American politics.
Yeah,
right?
the Democrat Party can't just rely on their traditional strongholds within, like, say, Latino demographics or African Americans. Those advantages are steadily eroding.
Exactly. We are seeing a massive change almost 100 years after the New Deal realignment. And I think another calculus that the Republicans have is, right, we're still 13 months out from
the
midterms.
Yeah.
Right. So whatever happens now may not necessarily have lingering effects for the next 13 months until we have midterms next November. And I also suspect that what is really going to determine next November's midterms is going to be these gerrymandering wars that are happening at the state level.
Yeah, Texas, California,
right, and Missouri. We see other states thinking about, right, doing mid-cycle redistricting as well.
Yeah, that's definitely true. And if I'm not mistaken, there was one midterm during the Obama years that took place about a year after a shutdown, and the Republicans still picked up seats in the House and in the Senate.
Yes, right. A lot of sort of these congressional districts are already solidly gerrymandered to elect a member of Congress from one party.
Yeah.
Right. Only a very small, limited number of really competitive seats in the House.
All that being said, though, it really makes me wonder, how long will this shutdown last for? The last one lasted for 34 days. There's a deadline, or rather, a milestone coming up on the 15th when federal workers are supposed to be paid, right? But who knows, it might just blow past that milestone.
Sure, that's a great question, and I don't have an answer for you, right?
Yeah, I wish.
As you mentioned, in about a week or so, right, October 15th is when federal workers are going to get their paycheck. If the shutdown goes past the 15th, federal workers are going to miss a paycheck, right? Sort of whether they are furloughed or whether they are still working. They're not going to be paid, right? Of course, it creates all sorts of difficulties and stress for these federal workers who have to make do without a paycheck, and also with the threat of being laid off coming from the White House.
Yeah, and given that we're traveling there at the end of the month, I really, really, really hope that the air traffic controllers get paid.
Yes, I agree.
Well, in that case, Adrian, do you have any last thoughts that you'd like to leave the audience with?
I mean, we haven't sort of talked about the possible sort of foreign policy implications of this.
Yeah.
So, in the larger scheme of things, the US credit rating has already been downgraded now by all three credit rating agencies. In the short term, right, we're not going to see another credit downgrading. But over the longer term, right, I think another credit downgrading should not be discounted. So, right, in the much longer run, it's not. But, what I think is going to happen is, right, so the American soft power is going to take another blow because of this shutdown. And if we talk about this in terms of, right, sort of strategic competition between US and China, right, it is just another own goal by the US.
Yeah.
Right. So we've already seen President Trump go to the UN to address the UNGA, right? And he's talking about teleprompters not working and escalators, right? So not working. And, you have a very different message from China portraying itself as defender of the international order, right? And so we see the US being cast as a disruptor to the international system that it helped create.
Yeah.
And it is also now being seen as unstable.
Dysfunctional, yeah.
Right? Unstable, as you call it, right? Sort of dysfunctional domestically, right? Not just with this government shutdown, but as we see, the administration is now planning on sending sort of more National Guardsmen into more American cities that are being run by Democrats, right? And I think this is not a good, what's the word I want to use, like sign or a good advertisement for American soft power.
And the American way of governance, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, we're going to probably have to reserve a lot of those topics. For example, ICE going into Chicago and maybe Portland, talking about things like, the conduct of US foreign policy. For example, I believe the US ambassador to Singapore's, the candidate, his name was moved for cloture, I believe, in the Senate just last week. But we'll have to follow up on those in future episodes.
Sure.
In the meantime, thank you for your time, Adrian.
Thank you, Kevin.
And thank you everyone for tuning in. We hope you enjoyed this episode. If there are any questions or topics you would like us to tackle in future short episodes of this sort, feel free to reach out to us on social media or through email. Until next time, stay safe and we'll see you again.